Welcome back, and in this module, we are going to look about books, all about books. I think I just usually like to start the class with a recap. So we looked at some of the important aspects of mass media and everyday life. We looked at how we have come a long way in terms of right now we are living in an instant communication world. We are connected 24/7, but it almost took 3,500 years. You look at the timeline, okay, about 3,500 BC, people used to communicate through pictographs, and then we came a long way. We had phonetic writing, and then we had the movable type print, and then we have the digital computers. In the meantime, there were so many other inventions and other developments that added to the way how information was communicated. But personally, if you ask me, the most one of the most important invention I would say is telegraph. I think that kind of completely, it broke the barrier of time and space, but it doesn't get mentioned in the timeline. But it's all right, because it's very subjective in terms of how certain authors will express the importance of certain information communication revolution. And personally, I feel telegraph was one of the most important inventions. And then we also looked at the mass media concept, because we are going to look at 8 mass media industries, starting from books, newspapers, recordings, radio, film, television, and the internet. We'll be looking at various aspects of mass media from three lenses. The first is how mass media is profit centered. Desire to make money is the root cause for all the mass medias. They want to make money. That's period. And the second is how the technological development has affected production, delivery, and distribution over the last several decades. And the third aspect is how mass media mirrors society, how it affects politics, how it affects the society and culture. So everything, I think, it kind of feeds back into mass media. So these are the three important lenses that I want you to look at every mass media, and that's precisely the aim for this class. And basically we'll be looking at how book industry is all about making money, how technological changes has affected its production, delivery, and consumption. And we're also looking at the content of books itself, how it has changed over time. So these are very broad areas, but we are trying to kind of get the gist of what the importance of books from these three lenses. And by the end of the class, you'll be asked certain questions. These are some example questions. What are audiobooks? What do you call a book that achieves outstanding financial success? Which is the only US chain bookstores, and all the other stuff. So not necessarily you're going to expect these questions. Probably you might get something like these. So let's get started with the today's topic. How book has evolved. Okay, for instance, if you look at the history of books, the first book that was ever printed in the North America was the Baysom book, which was in 1640. Okay, and that is a milestone in terms of the medium of book itself, because it was the first book that was ever published. And earlier we looked at in the previous section, how the printing press was invented way back in 1450s by Gutenberg in Germany, and then slowly it spread, and it took almost several centuries to come to a point that the books actually came to the United States only in 1640. It's about like 200 odd years. And you won't believe, I think recently I was reading a news article. The Baysom book, it was sold for, you won't believe the price. It sold for almost $14 million. Yeah, like imagine one book is selling for $14 million. You might ask, like, oh, what the hell, man, how can you spend so much of millions of dollars for a single old book? See, it was not just a book, it was a milestone. It kind of laid the foundation for the book industry itself in this country. So that is what the significance of that book. I think as of now, there are about 11 copies, and almost 10 copies are there in the United States. Almost only one copy is somewhere in the world. And that's the significance of that book, the Baysom book. And ever since that, I think it took a lot of time. The publishing houses were keen about making profits. They were publishing a lot of topic. There were many revolutionary authors. Thomas Paine was one of the important different authors back in those days, and then Mark Twain. So they all helped in the creation of different genre of books. The earlier books were on poetry, on humor, on politics, lots of other topics, and it actually took a lot of time. And right now you can possibly cannot even list the different genre of books that's available for our consumption. So again, the publishing houses is very important, because earlier the publishing houses were in charge of possibly everything. They used to acquire content, they used to kind of do lots of other marketing stuff, they used to sell it, and there were a lot of other aspects that was closely related to publishing houses that helped them keep the book industry under their influence. And again, right now things have changed drastically, and we'll see how the publishers are changing the strategies in terms of being a profitable medium in this business. So let's look at the first aspect, audiobooks. You might be very familiar with audiobooks these days. In fact, audiobooks are nothing but it's abridged or complete versions of classic books, and it can be on possibly any title. It can be new titles, old titles. It can be available on CDs and even as internet downloads. And I am a big fan of audiobooks because I commute from New Jersey to Westchester, and I've been, after a point in time, I was listening to all the FM stations, and I got really tired of all the music. Then one of my friends suggested, why don't you try to spend some time on podcasts and audiobooks? I wasn't really fascinated initially by that, but then I kind of stumbled upon some lovely topics. I was listening to a top book called Charles Duhigg. He had written a book about forming habits, the various habits that we have every day, and how some habits can actually pull you down. So it's a fantastic audiobook that I really loved. And one of the other important audiobook I would say is a collected short stories of Somerset Maugham. If you're interested, let me know. I have a copy of it. I can share it with you. I love Somerset Maugham. He was one of the most prolific authors of 20th century. I think in the beginning, early part of the 20th century, I think he was the highest paid author. And again, a lot of classic books are being made as audiobooks, and then this whole concept of audiobooks started in 1980s, and right now there are a lot of internet downloads you can use to download audiobooks on on possibly any topic that you can think of. So audiobooks is kind of very much in use. A lot of people prefer audiobook because I think when you're reading it takes a little bit of time. So audiobook is something that you can turn it on and you can pretty much do any other stuff on the side, kind of multitasking. And the second thing is ebooks. Again, ebooks is our simple, the same book that what we can read as a physical copy, we can even as an ebook. It can be downloaded to be read later on tablets or on your smartphones or on your any mobile devices. And as of the recent statistics, 30% of sales, book sales in the United States is being attributed to ebooks, because a lot of people are spending a lot of time with their mobile platforms, and Kindle and Nook is a kind of a is selling very much. And a lot of people read books as download the ebooks or buy ebooks, and that's the reason we can see 30% of book sales in the United States is attributed to ebooks. But the book gives you a different figure, and that's what I also want you to mention, because the book publishing industry is a very, very time consuming industry. It's not something that happens overnight. For instance, if I want to publish a book through a book publishing agency, it will take several months. Because even though we're talking about, oh well, we are living in a very fast paced world, but the book publishing industry is got a very long term. Okay, for instance, if you want to publish a book, you have to send a manuscript to them. They will have to kind of do a copy editing of that, and then they will get back to you. Then you have to negotiate the contract, what's the kind of royalty, how much percentage goes to the publishing house, how much goes to the author, and then they will take over the content and they will try to design. They will spend a lot of time on cover, because when you think of cover design, that's actually attributed, that can increase your sales or decrease your sales. And then they'll market the books, and then how we are going to possibly make money out of the book. So there's a very long process, and that's why the figure in the book is way less than what it is right now. So yes, even though it's a recent book that Shirley Biagi has written on Introduction to Mass Media, but the sales figures are completely less than what I have said in this. So moving on to the next one is, so what happened was, earlier, the profits in the book publishing is basically, if someone buys the book, then the publishing house makes some certain percentage of the money and the author gets certain percentage. But things are now changing fast. Now they also want to make more money out of one title. It's just not the physical sales of a book that means profit, but what possibly they can make a profit from a title of the book itself. So the subsidy rights is kind of the important thing when it comes to marketing or publishing a book. And what it means is, in addition to the physical copy of the book, how the publishers can kind of capitalize the content, how they can kind of make that book into paperbacks, or how they can sell the book to another market, like translate into Spanish, or like hundreds of other languages across the world. For instance, if you take a topic like Harry Potter, okay, it's a global blockbuster, and it's translated in many languages, and all the money, it goes to the publishers as well as the authors. So that's the way they're looking at. For instance, Iron Man, okay, that's a kind of a movie, right? But then you also have a lot of toys and souvenirs and bags, so even the characters can be also kind of marketed for money. For instance, Spider-Man, okay, or we can even make as a t-shirt, or we can have some toys, we can have some kind of bags. So that is how they're looking at, not only that, we are looking at making books into movies. There are a number of movies, but recently I think one of the top sellers, New York Dog's Purpose, and prior to that, like a lot of like Hidden Figures, and Harry Potter, and I think it's endless, The Girl on the Train, we can go on and on. So there are umpteen number of books that was a super that had super sales, that has been made into movies, that also kind of feeds into the book publishing industries for making profits. And not only that, video games, for instance, you have so much stuff like Mortal Kombat, and lots of other books that are even made into video games. And then possibly they can also use this in terms of, for instance, there is a nice book, they will start making a part of that published in newspapers or magazines or some columns, thereby they also make money out of that as well. And for instance, it can be used as audiobooks, it can be made as ebooks. So there are umpteen number of possibilities to make money from one title, and that is called subsidiary rights. So that's very important for you to understand. I've also have got some few examples. For instance, we also call a book a blockbuster, which means any book that achieves outstanding financial success. Which means a book, it has a sales of about like 100,000 copies or 1 million copies. That's called a blockbuster. And I think there are many books that have had a blockbuster status, and people are being paid a lot of money to write books. For instance, there are many people like Mary Higgins Clark. She's been paid $64 million for writing 5 books for Simon and Schuster, which is one of the publishing houses. And Lena Dunham, she's been offered about $3.7 million for a book, Not That Kind of a Girl. The publishing house is Random House. And Tom Clancy. There are so many people who are paid like millions of dollars. And again, the problem that we see right now is publishing houses are looking only for successful names rather than giving opportunities for newbies or fresh authors. This is something that is kind of a negative aspect to book publishing. For instance, they say this, I don't know how true the statistics is, there are close to like 5,000, 6,000 manuscripts that are laying with the publishers. They are yet to be kind of looked in detail by the publishing houses. There can be even like hundreds of Harry Potter like books sitting idle for nothing. So because of the fact that the author is something is new or he doesn't have any credibility, but look at, they're giving chances to people like Lena Dunham, like, she's just like, does a little bit of TV shows and something, and using based on that popularity, she's writing a book. And I think recently, one of the other comedian who I really like, I'm not able to get her name right from the top of her head. She's very funny. She has acted in a couple of movies. Amy Schumer. Yeah, she's also been given paid a lot of money to write a book about her life. So the problem with publishing houses is they want to go for only reputable names and not give chances for newbies. This is not a very healthy sign, because when it comes to book, if you're not going to give an opportunity for young talents, what happens is it kind of reflects in the society as well. Because again, that's what media, how it impacts society in the long run. Because we need a quality content, but rather we only go with the value of certain names and people who don't have that much as a regular writer who has got a lot of insight about life and other stuff, just because he or she is not popular. So that's very sad. And that's what happens, in terms of, giving opportunity for new authors. And not only that, looking at the potential of how books are made into movies, there are offices that are there in New York and Los Angeles where they look at the potential. They read a book and they think, oh, maybe I think we should try to make a movie deal out of that. So they always look at the content or stories or characters that can have some, universal appeal, and that's what they want. Like, they want one blockbuster where it's just not the book, but also it can spawn other money from other platforms like movies and video games and ebooks and audiobooks and translation and other aspects where they can potentially make money from books. And this is what is kind of also not very nice, because if Hollywood is going to depend on books, what happens to other story forms? Okay, so if you look at most of the movies that's coming out recently, it's actually from books which is made into movies, and movies which is made into books as well. So it's kind of mutual beneficial for the industry, but I think in terms of content, it's not giving a variety, because it's kind of limiting itself into a kind of a smaller area. That's not a very healthy sign, and that is my personal opinion. And the third aspect I want to talk to you in terms of how book industry is kind of profit centered. Oh no, technology is affecting the industry as well. For instance, earlier we had bookstores like Borders and Barnes and Nobles, where it was a reputed bookstores where people used to go and spend time and buy books. But with the advent of internet in the late 90s and the 2000, things have kind of spelled doom for many of the physical retail stores for books. Borders completely they went bankrupt. They closed down all their stores across the country, and the only store that's surviving right now is Barnes and Nobles, because I think still going to a store and reading a book physically by holding it, I think that has a charm. But we really don't know what's going to happen, because when you look at internet retailers, there is a large margin in terms of the price of book. For instance, I want to buy a book, okay, and I go and look at a price at a regular store in a Barnes and Nobles or a small bookstore. It'd be like $25 and $30. I come home and I look up online Amazon. I can get a used book or somewhere like a paperback edition. I can get it for like $5 or $7. There are many sites like Thrift Books and Spendless, like lots of sites where you can get the same book at much cheaper price. And the problem is you cannot bargain in a regular bookstore, but then you have some kind of ways where you can get some good deals online. And that is again kind of spelling doom for many of the retail bookstores, and the internet bookstores are kind of the major leaders in terms of the book publishing industry, because a lot of people want to buy the PDF version, or the ebook, or the audiobooks, and that is kind of revolutionizing how the books are presented. Because earlier the physical book really had the charm, and it had the sales, and it had the reach. But right now, with the advent of the internet and various other technological innovations like Nook and Kindle, people prefer or spend a lot of times downloading and downloading all this PDF and ebooks and audiobooks, and thereby it's kind of a struggle for the retail stores to kind of remain in business. That's a real struggle, but they're trying their best to kind of make it in a way that is kind of sustainable in the long run. And that is what we need to keep in mind, how the technology has affected the production of books, its delivery and consumption. Because earlier we looked at how the sales of books meant where people physically bought those books, but right now I think people can pretty much download books, or get books online, and even kind of use illegal torrent sites. When I was a student, I used to kind of try to go to certain sites where I can use some PDF, or rip some ebooks. I've done that because I think it kind of saved me a lot of money, but I would not do that right now, because of the fact that I felt that the authors are being deprived of their profits, and the publishing houses are deprived of being the profits. So there's something that makes me think twice to do that. But as a student, I think I had the thing like rights to say, well, I don't have money and I'm going to do this no matter what. So yeah, this is what we kind of sometimes feel, that how technology has changed production and delivery and consumption. Because we looked at how ebook sales are attributed to almost 30% in the United States, where a lot of people are trying to download or kind of get the books online and read on mobile platforms. And that's one thing that you need to keep in mind. And recently I was looking at a news article where the pod is kind of getting attention across the United States, where there are some stores, I'm talking about regular retail bookstores, where people can go and they can just look at the machine, look up the books, or browse for some topics. If they like the book, they can just click it, and it can be printed, bound, and it can be sent to your any address that you mention. And there are many stores that are actually trying to kind of adopt this new strategy. And I thought I could share this kind of gadget with you. This is the gadget, how it looks like. You just have to go and in front of this desktop, look up for some books that you want, and all you have to do is just click on that, and it's going to print and bound that book. It can be 300 pages or any number of pages in less than 4 minutes. This is called the espresso book machine, and it's gaining momentum across the country. And again, see, this is what you call sustainability of two businesses. Well, they feel technology is taking away the business, but then they're using the same technology for physical stores to sustain in the long run as well. So it's a kind of way to adapt itself to changing environment. And we'll have to just see how this concept is going to kind of pick up in the days to come. And also, we also want you to look at how media mirrors society, how the content itself is kind of changing. For instance, I personally started kind of looking at the book industry around like 2015. I think when I think The Girl on a Train was a very popular book recently. And then in 2015, like you go on a subway, or you go to a grocery store, or you just talk to your friends, they will invariably talk about, hey, did you read the book on The Girl on a Train? And eventually that will be talked about in television or in radio stations or somewhere. So that's kind of a book that reaches blockbuster status, because people invariably talk about it at some point. And I felt at one point in time, the topic on girls was the kind of thing that people are reading. For instance, Gone Girl, okay, that was, I think, a Ben Affleck movie, but actually it was a book which was a kind of a blockbuster, and then it was made into a movie. And then one of my favorite series, it was called the girl with a dragon tattoo, or the girl who kicked the hornet's nest. And it was all about the girl, okay, everything revolved around the girl, because that was at one time kind of a rage among authors. They started cashing in on one certain content at some point. But I think off late I didn't find any book that could be actually called a blockbuster. For instance, everybody knows Harry Potter, okay, that was J.K. Rowling's blockbuster book. That was a kind of a, it made a lot of money, not only as selling books, but also it was made into movies, it was made into souvenirs, it was made into theme parks, it was made into translated into several languages across the world. It was kind of marketed for its concept. For instance, Harry Potter festival and glasses, no, it's endless. So that's the kind of a blockbuster, and that's the kind of talk about subsidiary rights, where the publisher has made tons and tons of money with just one title. But in the last 1 year, or 2016, I didn't find any book that could achieve this kind of status of like a global blockbuster. No, after Harry Potter, I didn't think anything that even came close. But we have several authors, like I think people like John Grisham and Dan Brown and Tom Clancy and a couple of other people. They keep getting blockbusters every other time. But I think it has not reached a point where I think one book that could completely get a global appeal is something that's long overdue. We just have to wait and watch. And look at this particular thing, this is the latest figure from the New York Times bestsellers, where you see James Patterson, Candice Foss, A Dog's Purpose, again, which was made into a movie, A Man Called Love, Fever, and Egomaniac. Look at the kind of content. Okay, I want you to look at how things have evolved. For instance, if you go online, if you look at the New York Times bestsellers from 1940s, the content at that point in time will be completely different. For instance, imagine during like 10 years back or something, imagine a topic like werewolf, Twilight, and what was the other book, A Fault in Our Stars. If you're going to look at just the topic, if you're going to pitch this idea maybe like 25 30 years ago, I think people will say like, what are you talking about? I think this will not get people's attention, a guy who's dying and he falls in love, like, what's the topic, man? But then it became a blockbuster, because that is how the authors knows the pulse of the people. What will make the people talk about the story, connect with the characters, get the story out. So there are so many things that goes in terms of understanding the psyche of the people, and that's the creativity of these authors. Sometimes they manage to kind of get the people's attention, and that's why you see that they made it to the New York Times bestseller. It's so, which means these are definitely blockbusters, making it to the top 5 in New York Times bestsellers. And this talks about the combined print and ebook as well. As you all as I told you, ebooks are books that can be read or downloaded online. And you see Hidden Figures, again, it was a very good book that was also marketed for movies, and again it was again a very, it's completely, we can call this as a blockbuster. And we look at, these are completely different topics. We have Hillbilly Elegy and 3 Days in January and Killing the Rising Suns by Bill O'Reilly, and the Magnolia Story. Okay, so what I want you to look at is, look at the content itself. What do you, for me and you, I think the thing may not be that appealing, but it is definitely appealing to a large reading audience who are hooked into reading books. So that's one thing that we need to read and keep in mind, how the taste of the people is being analyzed with the changing time. So that's very something that's important for you to keep in mind, how the content of the books reflect the mentality of the people during that point in time. And again, getting a book published is not an easy task. Okay, if you have to publish books that makes it to the top or something like that, you will have to invariably go through these big 5 publishing houses. I think for many authors, getting their book published in any one of these publishing houses is the dream of the lifetime. So if you have like Pearson, Reed Elsevier, and Thomson Reuters, and Walters Kluwer, and Random House, and Hachette Lived, so you look at the big five publishing houses, okay? The beauty is that is none of this company is based in the United States, and still they seem to be running the book industry in the United States. So that's kind of a little irony in itself, because even though book publishing industry is something that, we have a booming book publishing industry, but none of the company is based from the US. It's all being done from being having their headquarters somewhere across the world, and that's the kind of this funny situation with regard to the book industry in the United States. None of the company belongs to the US. So this is the situation, and Pearson is a big company. The revenue is about $9 billion. So they are the leaders in the book publishing industry right now, and they have wide variety of topics and areas that they publish their books in. And we have the Reed Elsevier, which is number two. We have Thomson Reuters, Walters Kluwer, Random House, and Hachette Lived. I think Penguin also, I think, merged with Random House recently. So there are many publishing houses which are also kind of allied with these top agencies as well. And for every author, getting their book published in these big five is their dream, because once you get a contract with them, that's it. I think you will be signed for $1 million or several $1 million, and that should be kind of, settle your life or something like that. So it's a dream for many authors to get their books published in these kind of forums. And that's the thing that you have to keep in mind, that the book industry is a very big industry. It started way back in 1640. When we have come a long way, we see it's all about money. Blockbusters and subsidy rights is the norm of the day. Even if you have a very good book, a manuscript, unless you have a kind of a reputation, it's very impossible. It's highly impossible for you to get published in these big five unless you have the backing. But right now the internet is actually making a level playing field, because earlier authors used to rely on these big five to get their books published. But right now, I think if I have the book, and I think if I have the knack and strategy to make it a success, I can go online and do it. Amazon is there, lots of other online platforms there, where you can publish your books practically spending nothing. And if the book really has content, and if you're able to market it well, then sky is the limit. So the internet actually has changed how the book publishing industry operates. And as I told you, the book publishing is a very long process, and that's why some of the figures and statistics that is published in the book in Shirley Banerjee is completely outdated when it comes to the latest in terms of the book industry. So these are the questions that I want you to answer. It's very simple, and if you had paid close attention to what was being discussed, I think you should be able to answer this. And again, that's why I gave you this link, New York Times bestsellers. Look at some of the genre. There is like fiction, non-fiction. Look at the kind of topics they're dealing with, how the topics is relevant or irrelevant, and look at how the content is structured in this particular genre that you're looking at. And also I want you to look at this, okay? I want you to look at any particular genre, whether it's fiction or non-fiction or any other genre, and look at the top three sellers and see whether this book is associated with the big five. I think that'd be an interesting aspect to look at, how all this big publishing industry is also crucial for you to kind of, make the book as a bestseller. So is it some independent book publisher where they're able to crack the code and make it to the top, or it's only the big publishing houses who still kind of, run the industry? I think that'll be a good exercise for you to kind of, work on. And again, it's very simple. I think you shouldn't have any fine in finishing this class test, and it's due by 11 p.m. so try to upload your answers to D2L at the earliest. And you all have a nice day, and I'll see you again in an online class recording.